Hi, it's Dr. Bob here in Marina Del Rey in California. Right now, California is going through a little bit of a situation. They've had a break in one of the lines that brings oil from the oil derricks, which sit just off the coast, into the mainland for processing, which really brings to mind all the oil reserves that sit under this part of Southern California. What many people may not realize is prior to Los Angeles being the great hub that it is now, with all the people and the big skyscrapers and the streets and the traffic, that this was an area that was originally built on oil. So early in its history, when oil was first discovered here, it was oil that built Southern California, not gold like it is to the north. So how does this oil form? Well, there are many stories about the creation of oil that mainstream scientists might try to portray, but there are some issues. They talk about great peat bogs or forests that were gathered over millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years that create these huge deposits of petroleum products that we see, of coal and oil and natural gas. But there are some issues with their view. The worldview portrays these great forests, which would require great root systems and soil systems. And yet when we find oil, the oil explorers from all the major oil companies, when they go out looking for oil, what they're looking for are layers of sediments. So just as they never looked in the Gulf of Mexico for oil because they didn't imagine that there would be these great sediments of oil or sediments in the Gulf of Mexico, they found the great Whopper Sands deposits. And sure enough, under them is oil deposits. But here, what we see are great deposits of petroleum products, coal or oil or natural gas, and they're on great clay deposits. There are no root systems. In fact, when you find a tree in these deposits, typically what you'll find is a sheared off tree. If you do find a root system, it's sheared off roots. And so it tells us that the place where these plants grew is not the same as the place where we're finding them now in these petroleum deposits. So we have these great deposits of clay, and on top of them sits the petroleum deposits, and then sediments on top of that. So what we have learned is that the Great Flood, as the waters receded, would have stripped off all of this sand and deposited on top of these great deposits of plants and animals. The materials that exist in oil, there is a substance that is also found in chlorophyll and hemoglobin. And this is found in oil. So we know that there's a biological origin for these deposits. And what we see with these great oil deposits and coal deposits is the remnants of the flood. The quantity of coal and oil also tells us a lot about Noah's world. Because if you took all of the biological mass that exists on the planet today, you would only have about 30% of what is necessary for the coal deposits we have. And that's sometimes used by this other worldview, this mainstream worldview, the non-Christian worldview, sometimes used as an excuse for why the story of the creation, story of the flood, couldn't have created the biomass that we see in all these petroleum products. However, when we read in the scriptures, we know that God separated the land from the waters. So we would have had this large landmass. The fact is, if you were to take just the landmass we have now, and there's good indications that the landmass prior to the flood was actually larger, but if you took just the landmass we have now, combined it together, and you eliminate all these great, ice sheets on the North and the South Pole, and these huge deserts, and just covered that land with these type of rainforest type material, which is what we see in the petroleum deposits, not peat and not swamps, but you see rainforest type material, ferns and cycads and those type of materials that we see now in the rainforest. If you took all of that, you would have more than enough to account for all of the coal and petroleum deposits that we have on the earth today. Not to mention the fact, as I say, that probably there was more land area at that time than there is now. So when we see these oil deposits and when we see the coal, what we're actually seeing are great remnants of the devastation that was caused as the floodwaters came and sheared off all of these forests that had existed in the land that God had created and that Noah inhabited. So once again, hope that you remember that it's okay to believe.